The following program is produced by Londonderry residents. The views and opinions expressed are not necessarily the views and opinions of the LACTV staff or its volunteers, and should not be considered an endorsement by CTV20 or its staff and volunteers.
Hello, Londonderry, and welcome to another episode of Concord Conversations. I'm your host, Representative Wayne McDonald, and I'm joined by my co-host this morning and fellow state legislator, Representative Doug Thomas. And we're delighted to have with us as our guest this morning, or today. I don't know what time of day you're going to be watching the show, but we're delighted to have Brian Gottlob, the Director of Economic and Labor Market, Director of the Economic and Labor Market Information Bureau for the Department of Employment Security with us. So welcome, Brian, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Wayne. Thank you for inviting me.
And Brian's an economist, and certainly in these troubled times with inflation and prices rising, and the pandemic is kind of in the rearview mirror, but certainly caused a lot of economic angst, and some of that we're still feeling. Brian, maybe you could tell us a little about the department and your bureau and some of the things you look for, and maybe even some of the trends you're seeing.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the New Hampshire Department of Employment Security is the organization that is responsible for providing unemployment insurance benefits to individuals who have lost their job. We collect money from employers to pay into the unemployment insurance trust fund. That's the fund that pays benefits to workers who have lost their jobs. My section of NHES, Employment Security, is a little different. We're what I call the data nerds. We look at economic data and economic trends, labor force trends, labor market trends. We have a contract with the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the national organization, to produce a series or a set of economic indicators on a monthly or quarterly basis, things like the unemployment rate, the job growth rate, jobs by industry. We produce employment projections for both a 2-year period and a 10-year period. We produce occupational projections. So that's a lot of what I do. In addition, my section, the Economic Labor Market Information Bureau, we do a lot of talking to business organizations. We testify in front of your legislature, give updates on where we think the economy is going, because that's important when the legislature's considering budget issues. They want to know what's happening in the economy. So we do that as well. Occasionally, we provide assistance to individual businesses. To give you an example, recently we've had some pretty good luck in the state in attracting medical products industry, different both pharmaceuticals or medical equipment, and they'll come to the state looking to maybe open a facility. But one of the issues that they have is what's happening with labor. So we and my organization will do a pretty thorough assessment of the labor market. How many people have the occupations that they're looking for in the region or in the state? Do a labor market analysis for them. Who else is hiring those people? How many, what they're paying. So we provide some direct services to businesses, but mostly we just put information out there and hope that people can understand it.
What are some of the committees you deal with in the legislature? Doug happens to be on Science, Technology, Energy. I'm on Health and Human Services. Neither of those probably fit with your mission, but Commerce, I would imagine, maybe Finance, Labor, certainly.
Labor, Ways and Means, less Ways and Means, not because we particularly get involved with tax issues other than the unemployment insurance tax issue, but they'll want an opinion on what's happening in the economy. If they're looking to do revenue estimates, they'll want to get a sense of where the New Hampshire economy is. The Labor Committee has a lot, this past year, and actually the last couple of years, has had a lot of issues related to the payment of uninsured employment benefits. Concerns about the benefits being very low, so there's been a number of proposals to raise those benefits. So one of the things that I do is I estimate what the implications of that are. What's it going to mean for employer tax rates? What's it going to mean for the unemployment insurance trust fund, which we want to keep at a very healthy level, because if we don't keep it at a healthy level, like a lot of states, they have to borrow money from the federal government. When they borrow money from the federal government, they have to pay it back. If they don't pay it back quickly, they pay some penalties. So we don't do a lot of work with the Health and Human Services Committee. We don't do a lot with science and technology. Mostly Commerce, Labor, Ways and Means are the committees that we address primarily.
That makes sense.
Brian, I noticed, I don't think it goes without saying, that the two industries that seem to be affected the most right now with labor is the health industry and
Right.
perhaps the service industry. Could you expand on that
Yep.
as to maybe not only why you think that is, but is it something that is beyond our control?
Well, you're absolutely right. If you look, and I do look at this on a regular basis, I look very closely at the job openings by industry, and the job openings not only by industry but also by particular businesses. The number one industry right now in terms of unfilled job openings is the healthcare industry. Hospitals have really struggled. Residential and nursing care facilities that deal with our older citizens really struggled. When you think about some of the reasons for that, one, during the pandemic, those were extremely stressful jobs. And so we saw a lot of individuals leave those fields. There's some demographic elements, tended to be a little bit older workforce. Other demographic, and so we saw a lot of retirements. Other demographic elements, those industries tend to be dominated by females, and they had have had more issues in terms of returning to the labor force because of things like child care issues, taking care of individuals and their family for health. Women tend to, the responsibilities tend to fall on those individuals. So healthcare is the number one. Registered nurses has been the number one occupation in demand in the state, almost everywhere. There's almost throughout the state, with one exception, some in the western part of the state in Sullivan County, Cheshire County, our most manufacturing intensive regions. So not necessarily, but in the aggregate, registered nurses, licensed nurses, LNAs, licensed nursing
The governor
assistants.
relaxed some of the certification requirements if you come from another state. Does
Yeah.
that help that situation at
I,
all?
thi-
or-
I think it does help. One of the things that I notice when I look at those issues is that we don't attract a lot of individuals in those fields from other states. One of the big competitors that we face is just to our south in Massachusetts. Every day, about 1,200 registered nurses commute from New Hampshire to Massachusetts. You know, the eastern Massachusetts, Boston metro area, a lot of healthcare facilities. And when you look at the wage differential, not so much at the starting, new nursing, but as you go up in experience, at the top, you see $40,000, $50,000 differences in pay. So it becomes very economically feasible for someone to want to live in New Hampshire but work in Massachusetts. So we see a lot of people working just to our south in that particular.
Kind of like traveling nurses, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, just in commuting. That's the other aspect, Wayne. Glad you mentioned that. When I look at who's posting jobs for registered nurses or for any type of nurse and for healthcare in general, a lot of national organizations are recruiting in New Hampshire. Who is most likely to take those positions? Well, relatively new, recent graduates, because they don't have the family obligations or the family ties, so they can spend a month or more at another location. So the competition right now across the country, because everybody's dealing with it everywhere, healthcare, particularly in nursing fields, extremely difficult.
We see that very much. Both Wayne and I sit on the committee for the county, Rockingham County.
I was
I'm
just
on the
going to bring that
executive
up.
Yeah, yeah.
And we see it very prominently in our nursing home.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of open slots. We have made some moves to attract a few people the best we can, but as you know, salaries and costs are paid by people's taxes.
Right, it's
and
tough.
we try and keep them low
That was
as
a
well.
huge part of the reason our county budget went up like, what,
Yeah.
$6 million
Yeah.
this past year?
Right.
And that's a big part of the
Just
reason.
to get track, and we were successful in filling a few of those slots, but we're still woefully understaffed.
Yeah.
And of course, if you go with the traveling nurses, it's more expensive than
Oh.
actually having one on staff.
And
a
hospitals,
regular employee.
hospitals are dealing with that also. I mean, they don't have the same constraints as a county nursing home, but I have talked to financial officers of hospitals, and the fact that they've paid 2 to 3 times the rate for some of these traveling nurses has put a strain on hospitals, particularly some of the more rural hospitals. But the county nursing homes, there was a program that NHES had along, and it was we administered it, but it wasn't our program. It was with some of the ARPA funds during the pandemic, was to provide an additional stipend to nurses in the nursing homes, residential care facilities, just to keep them in their jobs. Why? Because again, extremely stressful during the pandemic. You had older residents with health issues, their families couldn't visit them, just very difficult. So to keep some of those folks in those positions, there was a stipend, $500 stipend, that helped keep some people in their positions and helped keep them jumping to maybe less stressful jobs.
Okay. Now, I know to that point, and I don't know if you know what may have gone on with the rest of the country at the time, but some states were more restrictive than other states, on particularly in hospitals and who could visit and so forth.
Yeah.
Have you seen any difference in retention rates, perhaps in some states that were less restrictive?
I don't have any data on that, Doug. I think in general, the restrictions during the pandemic contributed a lot to different impacts in each state in the economy. One of the things that I look at, is the rate at which jobs were lost and recovered across all 50 states. And, the states that have recovered more or didn't lose as much, seen their job growth much stronger since the pandemic, are states generally that had less restrictive policies. And it's not a statement about whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but you had states like, in the upper Northwest, the Idahos and the Wyomings, they didn't have very significant restrictions. They didn't have the large urban areas. So people flocked there. I mean, New Hampshire benefited to a degree from people moving from the Boston metro area, New York City metro area, Hartford. Northern New England saw a big increase in people, but we still had greater restrictions on economic activity, so that didn't necessarily translate into job growth, where some of these other states saw pretty significant job growth. They got a benefit of more individuals, plus they didn't have the shutdown, so they were, they really benefited in terms of their job growth. New Hampshire's done really well compared to our neighbors. We have better job growth than all of the New England states. There's only one state in the Northeast that's done better since the pandemic, and that's not because they have a better economy. New Jersey. I don't think New Jersey has a stronger economy, but what happened? All those jobs in New York City that were in office buildings, when those office buildings cleared out, those people, a lot of them who lived in New Jersey, went to work from home in New Jersey. Now they're counted in New Jersey employment. So New Hampshire's done well, but you're right, some of the states that had less restrictive because they didn't have, they didn't have the urban areas that required some of those restrictions. They've done better, and I'm assuming that meant, their healthcare facilities didn't have the same restrictions.
Historically, New Hampshire has tended to recover from
Yeah.
economic challenges better than other states. And as we head into an election year and a change in administration in the corner office,
Yeah.
the governor's office, for the first time in 8 years, which is a long period of time, understandably, people are concerned, what's this going to mean? And certainly all of the department heads, all the state agencies, we don't know who the next governor is going to be, for sure. What are the thoughts? What are you hearing? What are your thoughts, particularly as an economist? Do you think, do you see any challenges down the road, depending on the next administration?
Yeah, well, New Hampshire is a small economy, like most states. Will follow to a degree and be either a victim or a beneficiary of what's happening in the national economy.
Sure.
We can alter that. We've proven that, as you mentioned, over decades, where we have had generally a stronger economy than most of our neighbors in the New England region.
We're usually the first ones to recover,
Yeah.
aren't we?
Yeah, and we don't always lose as many jobs. I mean, that can change a little bit, but I think our policies have contributed to to the growth that the state has had, our ability to recover faster. Among them is that, unlike most of the Northeast, New Hampshire for the last few decades has been able to attract people into our state. That changed a little bit during the pandemic, where northern New England saw some increase, but for decades, I say New Hampshire kept people from moving to the south and the west. If you look nationally, demographic trends are people have moved from the northeast down to the south or to the southeast and the southwest. New Hampshire kind of bucked that trend. We saw people, I used to say, we kept people from leaving the northeast. Why? Because, we have policies that, allowed people to keep more of what they earn.
We're like a branding star.
Yeah, exactly.
In the here is that we are attracted
Yep.
a lot of people.
So I think as long as we continue, in general that path, the Northeast region does not necessarily have a great reputation. It's generally seen as a high-cost area compared to other parts of the country. Not as business-friendly as as some parts of the country. And I think New Hampshire's reputation has bucked that trend, and it has helped the state grow in a way that many of our neighbors haven't. So I guess as long as that general philosophy that we don't necessarily need to follow exactly what everyone else is doing, I think we will perform better. But again, if the nation goes into a recession, I don't see that happening in the near term.
And the bond rating certainly plays a part, right?
Absolutely. Oh, and by the way,
And
that
we're what, AA right now, is it?
it depends on the particular rating agency. We're just a notch below the best. We did get, we've had some improvements in the last couple of years. I'd like to think I had something to do with that because I'm on the committee that pitches to the bond rating agencies every year. It can be challenging because there was a period of time where all of the bond rating agencies were looking at the Northeast, and in particular, they were looking at demographic trends. So they gave a downgrade to the state of Vermont because of their demographic trends.
Right.
We were able to show them how we were different than that. So the bond ratings make a difference.
Yeah.
It's a statement to the business community of the strength of our state.
I think the trends are very important to the business industry.
Yep.
They look at trends, even if there's slight trends, their confidence level is a big factor. And I would think we took some action this last term of lowering the business enterprise tax, business profits tax. I'm not sure which one was actually lower than the
Phasing
other.
out, moved up the, phasing out of the interest and dividends tax.
Right. So do you think that, although it's not by much, I understand that, but the trend, the forecast, but as it looks at business, would say, hey, here's a state that's trying to do something for business.
Yeah, I think that the statements to the business community are very positive. I think the challenges, I think traditionally has been for New Hampshire is that, and we haven't had this in a while, where we've seen a really difficult economy, and often it's the business community that is looked to make up, because so much of our revenues come from the business community. So the fact that businesses don't feel like they're constantly on the hook for whenever the state needs some additional money is a very positive statement.
And I think as one of the factors, I think recently we heard that there's a major company moving its headquarters out of Maine into New Hampshire. If that is still ongoing?
My organization isn't involved in that. That would be the Business and Economic Affairs, most likely. We've seen a number of initiatives where companies have moved their operations or established a new operation rather than expanding in another state. One of our neighbors. So I don't doubt that that's happening.
Of course, that helps the labor force too, when
yeah,
they do, to an extent.
I do think the challenge that we face, again, is convincing some of these companies that there are people who can be hired. That's part of what we do in my organization, is showing them that, yes, the labor market is tight, but, there are opportunities to hire. I think particularly in some of those skilled occupations. Some of the industries, that are having the most difficulty are some industries that, hospitality industries, retail, maybe a little bit lower skilled occupations, maybe that don't pay quite the same wages as some other industries. Those are some of the industries that have had the most. But if it's a good paying business, generally they'll be able to find the labor needed.
Well, that brings me to a related question. I know that pre-pandemic, particularly during the summer months, the season, many of the hospitality businesses relied very heavily on temporary foreign workers, young kids coming here. They work for maybe 2 or 3 months and they go back home. Not so much right now.
Yeah, it's been harder. I mean, that's been a trend. Probably for at least 6-7 years or so, it's been a little bit harder. Immigration has gotten not the best reputation, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, there's a notion that somehow these folks were taking jobs away from our citizens. I don't necessarily believe that that's the case. The other thing was, during the pandemic, you couldn't travel. It was impossible for some individuals from Europe. We tended to get a lot of New England gets a lot of Eastern European temporary workers during the summer seasons. That has been more difficult. There's other industries that, beyond just hospitality, that are facing that as well. Construction industry relies extremely heavily on immigrant workers. I had my roof done 6-7 months ago. There was not a English-speaking individual other than the business owner.
Wow.
So I know that some of the construction industries are having some difficulty as well. So immigration is, you have to separate those problematic people running across the border from the fact that they provide a real, can provide a real needed boost to our labor force.
Yeah, seasonal immigration, there's nothing wrong with that, because it's controlled. The job's needed for the period of time. Then they go back home. I think
in Londonderry, I mean, we're not as the apple orchards, the apple industry isn't as big as it once was. But even now, I think they still rely on, I think it was from Jamaica, folks from Jamaica to come in and to actually help. So that, to talk about seasonal work.
And that's been going on for many, many years. I mean, it's you find out people come in for just, 2 or 3 months.
Right.
And they depend on that. And it's needed because no one else is doing it.
Right, and it has been, for whatever reason, those numbers of visas have declined. And, I don't know whether it's just a sense that all immigration isn't is bad, and that's
The issuance of the visas, but has the applications for the visas also declined? Or?
I think they declined during the pandemic. I don't know, if they've recovered, and I don't know if it's taking longer. I'm not really sure what the problem is there, but we do know there aren't as many workers. I know if you talk to some of the agricultural businesses in particular, they have expressed real concerns about their ability to get the workers that they need. What's behind that? Not clear, but clearly there's something going on there. And it affects not just, the immigration, affects the high-tech industry as well. If you look at our New Hampshire, very sophisticated economy, a lot of high-tech businesses. You look at some of those occupations where, some computers occupations where 40% of the individuals who are in those occupations are foreign-born. So we do, a lot, both at the high end and the low end, we rely on immigration, whether it's temporary visas or whether it's, full-time individuals who want to, come over to this country and live permanently. Immigration's been a pretty important part of our
But again, that's been a program that's been well established
right.
and controlled,
Right.
and everyone knows who's coming over and where they're going and everything.
Right.
That's something that's needed
Right.
and very beneficial, at
Right.
least on the short term.
Yeah, and New Hampshire's fortunate. We don't deal with the issues that some southern border states deal with. So we see the benefits of immigration. So it's easy for me
Right.
to talk about the benefits of immigration. My community isn't overrun by people looking to cross the border. So, there are pluses and minuses. We happen to see most of the pluses in New
What
Hampshire.
was the current unemployment rate in New Hampshire?
2.6%.
And a lot of that is what, some of it's what,
Yep.
like frictional unemployment where
Yep.
people are between jobs and so
Right.
forth.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of the bane of my existence, to explaining to people that every time the unemployment rate goes up, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It often is. But there's unemployment is made up of people who lose their jobs permanently. That's what most people think of the unemployment rate as. People who are on temporary layoff, but it's also made up of people, as you mentioned, who are between jobs, who are looking for better opportunities, voluntarily leave their job. People who are new to the labor force, but haven't found a job yet, or people who are coming back into the labor force. And I can tell you, for the last year or more, the majority of unemployment and the increase has been people coming back into the labor force who stepped out maybe during the pandemic or for whatever reason. And new entrants, people who are just new to the labor force. So almost, over 50% or so are those new entrants, re-entrants. Another 10% or so are people who are just looking for new opportunities.
Right. Well, we're nearing the end of our time here, but Brian, thank you very much for joining us. And maybe as a brief final thought, we were talking about the, none of us have a crystal ball, but
Yeah.
we were talking about the future and the fact that the economy is slowing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
a recession down the road. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. I don't see a recession in 2025. The economy is slowing a bit. Labor force is slowing. Job growth is slowing, but it's still solid. And most importantly, Wayne, we're not seeing a big increase in people who are losing their jobs permanently. And unless you see that, if you don't see people losing their jobs, that means income isn't going to drop.
Right.
And if income doesn't drop, that means spending doesn't drop. And if spending doesn't drop, then we don't have a recession. And I don't
Excellent.
see that in
Excellent.
2025.
Excellent. Doug, any final thoughts as we wrap up here?
No, I want to thank you very much for the insight
Absolutely.
into an area that most people probably don't even think much about, and it's probably all Greek to them. But it's thank you very much for your time. We know statistics can mean a lot of things, and we're fortunate to have you explain what they really mean.
Well, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for joining us, and thank all of you, our viewers, for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you at our next episode of Concord Conversations. Take care.
preceding program was produced by Londonderry residents. The views and opinions expressed are not necessarily the views and opinions of the LACTV staff or its volunteers and should not be considered an endorsement by CTV 20 or its staff and volunteers.